Some of the darkest crimes in history don't come from strangers, but from inside the home. Today we'll be looking at 7 of the most disturbing cases where people ended the lives of their own relatives, beginning with Chris Watts, a man who pretended to be the perfect husband and father while secretly planning the unthinkable. To the outside world, Chris Watts was just an ordinary man. He lived in Frederick, Colorado, with his wife Shanann and their 2 little girls, Bella, who was 4, and Celeste, who was 3. Shanann was also 15 weeks pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy they planned to name Nico. From the outside, their lives looked perfect. Shanann often posted smiling videos on Facebook, showing Chris as a loving father and husband. To neighbors and friends, they seemed like the picture of a happy American family. But behind closed doors, things were falling apart. Chris was secretly seeing a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. He told her he was separated and that his marriage was basically over, but in reality, his wife had no idea. Chris didn't want to be tied down anymore. He wanted a fresh start, no wife, no kids, just a new life with his mistress. And instead of divorce, Chris decided on something much darker. On the night of August 12, 2018, Shanann flew home from a business trip. Security cameras at the front door caught her walking into the house around 2 a.m. That would be the last time she was ever seen alive. The next morning, Shanann and Chris argued in their bedroom. Shanann wanted to save their marriage, but Chris wanted out. During that argument, Chris attacked her. He ended her life in their bed while their daughters were still in the house. What happened next is one of the most disturbing parts of this story. After Shanann was gone, Chris dragged her body down the stairs and loaded it into the back of his work truck. His daughters, Bella and Celeste, were awake and saw everything. They asked him, "What's wrong with Mommy?" Chris didn't answer. Instead, he put both girls into the truck along with their mother's body. He then drove 45 minutes to a remote oil site owned by his company. The whole time, Bella and Celeste were alive in the back seat, sitting next to their mother. When they arrived, Chris pulled Shanann's body out of the truck and buried her in a shallow grave near the site. He then turned to his daughters. Celeste's life was ended first. Then Bella, the older one, realized what was happening. Reports later showed that she fought back and begged her father not to do what he wanted to do. Chris forced their small bodies into separate 8-inch openings on top of oil tanks. Investigators later said it was one of the most cruel, heartless acts they had ever seen. Hours later, Chris went on acting like nothing had happened. When Shanann's friend reported her missing that afternoon, police came to the house. Chris played the role of a worried husband. He gave interviews on local TV, saying he had no idea where his wife and daughters were. Standing on his porch, he begged for them to come home. To viewers, he looked like a grieving father. But to investigators, something seemed off. Neighbors told police Chris was acting strangely calm for someone whose family had just vanished. Detectives noticed he kept shifting his story during questioning. The next day, they asked him to take a polygraph test. Chris agreed, confident he could fool it, but he failed badly. When the results came back, the examiner told him he hadn't been truthful, pressing that he already knew what had happened to his family. Chris finally broke down. At first, he tried to blame Shanann, claiming she had harmed the children and that he reacted in anger, but the evidence didn't back that up. Under pressure, Chris finally admitted the truth. He had taken the lives of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. The case shocked the world, not just because of the brutality, but because of how Chris carried himself afterward. He smiled, he gave interviews, he hugged neighbors, all while knowing his wife and children were lying dead at a worksite. Prosecutors called him one of the coldest men they had ever seen. In November 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence in Wisconsin after being moved for safety reasons. The Watts family tragedy remains one of the most disturbing family annihilation cases in American history, not only because of the horrific way the victims' lives were ended, but because of the way Chris was able to stand in front of cameras and pretend to be a heartbroken husband, when in reality, he was hiding one of the darkest crimes imaginable. But while Chris Watts' crime was a case that involved a parent ending the lives of his two kids, the next case is the opposite, a case of how two kids wiped out their parents and family in cold blood. Before I go on to the next case, please take a second to like and subscribe. This is Dark Chronicles, where we explore the crimes that are almost too disturbing to believe, like the next story of the Bever brothers, two teenagers who did the unthinkable. In 2015, one of the most shocking family massacres in America was carried out by two teenagers, brothers, who decided to turn their quiet suburban home into a blood-soaked crime scene. Their goal wasn't just to take down their family. They dreamed of becoming infamous across the country. Robert Bever was 18, and his younger brother Michael was 16. Together, they had 5 younger siblings. From the outside, they looked like ordinary kids growing up in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. But behind closed doors, their minds were consumed by dark fantasies. They spent hours on the internet watching videos about mass shootings, reading about serial offenders, and studying past tragedies like Columbine. They even ordered body armor, knives, and survival gear online. To them, violence wasn't just an idea, it was their obsession. By July 2015, the brothers had built a plan. Step 1 was wiping out their parents and siblings inside the family home. Step 2 was a nationwide rampage, targeting strangers at random until police finally stopped them. In their twisted fantasies, they expected to end hundreds of lives before it was all over. On the night of July 22, 2015, they put the plan into action. Just before midnight, armed with hunting knives, Robert and Michael launched their attack. Their parents, David and April Bever, were the first targets. Taken by surprise, the parents tried to fight back, but the boys stabbed them again and again until both collapsed. Then, the brothers turned on their siblings, children who trusted them, some still asleep in their rooms. 12-year-old Daniel tried to dial 911, desperate for help, but he was caught and stabbed to death before he could finish the call. 7-year-old Christopher was attacked next. His life ended before he had any chance to defend himself. Then came Victoria, only 5 years old, who never stood a chance against her much older brothers. But not everyone in the house lost their lives. 13-year-old Crystal was stabbed multiple times but somehow survived. Though gravely wounded, she managed to crawl toward the door and call out for help. Her cries alerted neighbors, who quickly called 911. Police arrived within minutes and found the surviving children, along with the 2-year-old baby who had been left crying in her crib. The brothers didn't escape far. Officers discovered Robert and Michael hiding inside the house. Their spree halted before it could leave the family home. What investigators uncovered afterward was chilling. The crime scene was covered in blood. Computers and notebooks revealed months of planning, filled with notes about how the brothers wanted to become more infamous than the Columbine shooters. They had stockpiled knives, masks, and body armor, all waiting for the second phase of their plan. During questioning, Robert was ice cold. He admitted everything and even bragged, saying he was proud of what they had done. Michael tried to shift blame, claiming Robert pressured him into it, but evidence showed he had been deeply involved. In court, prosecutors described the attack as one of the most brutal family cases they had ever seen. Robert received life in prison without parole. Michael, being 16, was also sentenced to life, though he will have the possibility of parole after 38 years. The Bever family home stood abandoned for years, a haunting reminder of what happened inside. In 2019, it was finally torn down, and today, a memorial park stands in its place. The Bever case shocked the world not just because of the brutality, but because of who carried it out. 2 suburban teenagers who chose fame through violence over the lives of their own parents and siblings. If Crystal hadn't survived, their plan might have gone much further, spreading terror far beyond Broken Arrow. But while the Bever brothers failed to wipe out their whole family, this other man succeeded. Decades earlier, in one of the most infamous family murders in American history, a young man gunned down his parents and 4 siblings as they slept. a crime that would later be remembered as the Amityville Horror. The year was 1974, and the DeFeo family lived in a large Dutch colonial home in Amityville, New York. Inside the house were Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., his parents Ronald Sr. and Louise, and his 4 younger siblings, Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, and John, 9. On the surface, the family seemed comfortable and well off. Butch, the oldest son at 23, had a reputation for being hot-headed. He struggled with drugs, got into fights with his strict father, and often clashed with the rest of the family. On the night of November 13, 1974, everything came to a breaking point. Armed with a .35 caliber rifle, Butch crept through the house in the early morning hours. One by one, he went room to room and opened fire on his family as they slept in their beds. First his parents, then each of his siblings. By the time it was over, 6 members of the DeFeo family had lost their lives. What baffled investigators later was how none of them seemed to move or fight back. All were found lying face down in their beds, as if caught completely off guard. After the attack, Butch tried to play it cool. He went to work the next morning, pretending everything was normal. That evening, he rushed into a neighborhood bar, shouting that his family had been shot. Friends and neighbors hurried back with him to the house, where they discovered the horrifying scene. At first, Butch acted like a grieving son. He told police it must have been a mob hit, claiming his father had ties to organized crime. But his story quickly unraveled. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in his version of events, and within a day, Butch confessed. He admitted he had pulled the trigger on every member of his family. The case shocked the entire country. 6 people wiped out in their own home, not by strangers, but by the son and brother they lived with every day. During his trial, Butch's defense team argued he was insane, claiming he heard voices telling him to end his family's lives. The prosecution pushed back, saying it was nothing more than cold-blooded violence, fueled by anger and drugs. In the end, the jury agreed with the prosecution. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was found guilty on 6 counts of second-degree homicide and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. He stayed behind bars until his death in 2021, but the story didn't stop there. A year later, the house was sold to George and Kathy Lutz. Almost immediately, they claimed terrifying paranormal activity. Strange voices, violent visions, and an evil presence inside the home. Their account became the basis of the 1977 book The Amityville Horror, which was later turned into a string of movies. The haunting stories helped make the house one of the most famous in the world, but the truth behind it is darker than any ghost story. At its core, 6 innocent members of a family lost their lives at the hands of the person who should have been their protector, the oldest son, Ronald DeFeo Jr. But while Ronald wanted to end the lives of all his family members, the next guy was fine with ending the lives of just his parents. Joel Michael Guy Jr. was 28 years old in 2016, living off his parents while he drifted through college. Unlike his siblings, Joel never worked a job, never paid his own way, and relied completely on his mom and dad for money. His parents, Lisa and Joel Sr., were loving but strict. They had decided that with retirement coming, they would soon cut Joel off financially. To him, that meant no money, no easy life, and no control. This was unacceptable, so he worked out an evil plan to ensure it never happened. When Thanksgiving came around in 2016, everybody came around to the house in Knoxville, Tennessee. Joel's 3 sisters came to visit, and everything seemed normal. But Joel Jr. was secretly planning to end his parents' lives before they could end his allowance. He had already bought supplies, chemicals, knives, and plastic tubs. His notebooks, found later, spelled out a step-by-step plan for murder and cover-up. On November 26th, after the family meal, Joel's sisters left to return home. That's when the horror began. Joel Jr. attacked his father first, stabbing him dozens of times until he collapsed. When his mother tried to help, he turned on her too. Both were stabbed repeatedly in a frenzy of violence. But Joel didn't stop at killing them. He began trying to destroy their bodies. Using chemicals like bleach, drain cleaner, and hydrogen peroxide, Joel attempted to dissolve his parents' remains in plastic tubs in the bathroom. Police later described it as a diabolical stew. Parts of his parents' bodies were dismembered and placed in containers filled with acid. The entire house reeked of chemicals and blood. But Joel never got to finish his plan. His mother was supposed to show up for work that Monday, and when she didn't, concerned co-workers called the police. Officers arrived at the home and found one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Tennessee history. Blood covered the floors. Notes in Joel's handwriting laid out how he intended to burn, dissolve, and hide the bodies. In the bathroom, they discovered the remains of Lisa and Joel Sr. in a half-melted state. Joel was arrested shortly afterward. In court, prosecutors showed his detailed notes, complete with calculations of how much bleach to use and instructions on how to dispose of his parents' bodies. The jury heard about his motive: pure greed. He wanted to collect on his parents' life insurance and continue living off their money. But while Joel Guy's crimes were discovered quickly, the next case took years before the truth finally came out. Jeremy Bamber was the kind of man who liked control. He grew up on a big farm in Essex, England, White House Farm, a place of fields, animals, and a household that looked calm from the outside. His parents, Neville and June, ran the farm. Jeremy's sister Sheila lived there too, with her 2 young sons. From the street, it was a normal family home. Inside, things were not so simple. On the night of August 6, 1985, something terrible happened at White House Farm. By morning, 5 members of the family were found dead: Neville and June, Sheila, and her 2 little boys. The police were called and the scene was horrific. A police officer later described the house as a place where life had just stopped. Suddenly and quietly, but in the worst possible way. At first, it looked like the sister, Sheila, had done something unthinkable. Sheila had a history of mental illness, and some neighbors knew she had been off her medication. The early investigation pointed to her. The story at the time was that Sheila had shot her family and then taken her own life. The police wrapped that version of events around the crime and told the public what they thought had happened. But not everyone believed it. Jeremy Bamber, who was living in London at the time, told a different story. He said a stranger had broken into the house and ended the lives of his family members. He said he had been at a nearby pub earlier and only found out when police called him. The case split the village. Some people accepted the stranger story, others felt uneasy. As detectives dug deeper, they noticed things that didn't add up. Evidence at the scene suggested the killings might not fit the idea of one person turning on the family and then herself. Guns, angles, and the way the bodies were found raised questions. The police started to look more closely at Jeremy's story. They checked phone calls, alibis, and the little details that sometimes prove or disprove bigger lies. The investigation turned toward Jeremy. Motive became a key question. Jeremy had money troubles. He wanted to run the farm his way, and his relationship with his parents was strained. People began to ask whether he had reasons to want his parents and others gone. Then there were other facts. Jeremy had made insurance claims, and some witness statements did not match his timeline. Detectives rebuilt the night step by step and found holes in his account. In 1986, after a full trial, Jeremy Bamber was convicted of murdering his parents, his sister, and her 2 sons. The jury found the evidence strong enough to say he had planned and carried out the killings, then tried to blame it on someone else. He was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of release. But the story did not stop with the trial. For decades, the case stayed in the headlines. Supporters argued Jeremy was innocent. They pointed to errors in police work, possible new evidence, and questions about how the original investigation was handled. Newspapers, books, and TV programs re-examined the farm, retold the night, and pushed the idea that maybe the wrong person had been punished. Others pointed to solid pieces of evidence used at trial, like phone records, gun tests, and witnesses who contradicted Jeremy's story. They said the weight of the proof still pointed to him. Over the years, Jeremy appealed his conviction many times. He has always denied the crime, insisting he did not take those lives. Each appeal foundered, but the debate never fully died down. What makes the White House farm case stick in people's minds is not only the violence itself, but the long argument over truth and guilt. A family wiped out, a son who said he was innocent, and a court that said otherwise. It became one of those crimes where the story after the crime, the trials, the appeals, the books, the TV shows, became almost as big as the night itself. Today, White House Farm is remembered as a place of tragedy. The farmhouse still casts a long shadow in the village's history. For some, Jeremy Bamber is a cold planner who took the lives of his family to gain control and money. For others, he is a man wrongly convicted, a life ruined by a rush to judgment. Either way, the result was 5 dead people, 2 grieving families, and a wound that never fully healed for the small community around that farm.
Before we move to the next case, please take a minute to like and subscribe if you like the content so far. This is Dark Chronicles, where we uncover the most disturbing true crime stories in history. Thank you very much, and let's go back to the video.
The next case is the case of a man who ended the lives of his children for no reason. In 2014, a father from South Carolina shocked the entire country. His name was Timothy Jones Jr. On paper, he looked like a man who had it together. He was a computer engineer, made good money, and after a tough divorce, he even won custody of his 5 kids. To neighbors, he seemed like a hard-working single dad who was doing his best. But inside that home, things were falling apart. Jones wasn't just strict, he was harsh, cold, and paranoid. His children lived under constant pressure. Teachers and neighbors noticed something was off, but the warning signs weren't enough to stop what was coming. Jones's life was cracking. He was convinced his ex-wife was against him. He believed his kids were plotting to make him look bad. His mind twisted small problems into huge threats. By late summer of 2014, that paranoia had taken over. And then, on one August night, it exploded. Jones believed his 6-year-old son, Nathan, was trying to harm him. Instead of seeing this as the wild thought it was, he snapped. In a storm of anger and fear, he ended the lives of all 5 of his children. Their names were Mira, Elias, Nathan, Gabriel, and Elaine. They were just 1 to 8 years old. 5 young lives, all gone in a single night, taken by the person they trusted most. Afterward, Jones tried to hide what he had done. He placed each of his children's bodies into trash bags and loaded them into his car. For days, he drove across the South, carrying their remains. At gas stations, strangers noticed a terrible smell, but Jones brushed it off, saying he had hit an animal. Inside the car, police would later find bleach, blood-stained rags, and notes he wrote to justify what he had done. The cover-up couldn't last. His paranoia grew worse with each mile. And finally, his downfall came at something as simple as a traffic checkpoint in Mississippi. Officers noticed his nervous behavior, smelled what was coming from the car, and pulled him aside. What they found was worse than anyone could have imagined. Jones was arrested, and soon after, he confessed. He even told police where to find the bodies. It took 5 years for the case to reach trial. In court, prosecutors described him as selfish and abusive, a man who saw his children as property. The defense argued he was mentally ill and didn't know right from wrong, but jurors didn't believe it. They heard his own words, they saw the evidence, and they listened to the heartbreaking testimony of the children's mother, Amber Kaiser. Amber said that even though she hated Jones for what he did and wanted to make him feel what her children felt, she didn't think she had the power to decide that he be given the death sentence. In 2019, Jones was sentenced to death. He showed little emotion as the verdict was read. For many, it felt like justice, but no punishment could bring back the children whose lives ended that night. 5 young faces that never got to grow up, a mother who lost everything, and a community left to wonder how so many red flags were missed. The story of Timothy Jones Jr. stands as one of the most haunting family tragedies in America. It is the story of how paranoia, anger, and control can turn a father into a monster. And it forces us to ask a question no one wants to answer. How does a man who is supposed to love and protect his kids become the very reason they're gone? The final case is of a person who not only ended the lives of his family members, but also decided to end his own. In June of 2007, the world of professional wrestling was shaken by a story so shocking that fans still struggle to talk about it. Chris Benoit wasn't just any wrestler, he was a star. Known as the Canadian Crippler, Benoit had built a career on his incredible skill, his discipline, and his intensity in the ring. To millions of fans, he was a hero. To his friends in WWE, he was one of the hardest workers in the business. And at home, he seemed like a family man. He lived in Georgia with his wife Nancy and their young son Daniel. But behind that image, Chris was in trouble. His body had taken a beating after decades of wrestling. He had suffered countless concussions and injuries. On top of that, there were rumors about heavy steroid use, mood swings, and a temper that sometimes exploded. Those close to him noticed he had changed. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and seemed to struggle with depression. Still, no one expected what was about to happen. Over one weekend in June, everything collapsed. Chris ended the lives of his wife Nancy, his 7-year-old son Daniel, and finally, himself. Police later pieced together the timeline. On Friday night, Nancy was found in the home. By Saturday, Daniel was also gone. And by Sunday, Chris had taken his own life. It was a tragedy that stretched over 3 days, leaving behind questions that may never fully be answered. The wrestling world was left in complete shock. At first, WWE even aired a tribute show for Benoit, believing he had simply died unexpectedly. But when the truth came out just hours later, everything changed. WWE immediately erased his name from their website, their shows, and their history. To this day, they avoid mentioning him. The investigation revealed disturbing details. Empty bottles of alcohol were found in the home. Steroids were also discovered, leading some to believe roid rage might have played a role. But later studies suggested something deeper. Doctors examined Benoit's brain and found severe damage. Years of head trauma had left him with the brain of an 85-year-old dementia patient. Some experts believe this chronic brain injury, known as CTE, was the key factor that led to his violent actions. Still, others point to personal struggles. His marriage to Nancy had been rocky at times, and Chris was under enormous pressure in his career. Whether it was steroids, brain damage, or a mix of everything, the outcome was the same: an entire family destroyed, and a sport forever stained by the event. For wrestling fans, the Benoit case created a wound that never healed. Here was a man they cheered for, a man who gave everything in the ring, but who became the author of one of the darkest family tragedies in modern sports. For WWE, it forced a reckoning. They put new rules in place for drug testing, concussion protocols, and how wrestlers were treated. But even with those changes, nothing could erase the horror of what happened in June 2007. Chris Benoit's name has since become almost forbidden in wrestling circles. His matches are rarely shown, and his legacy has been erased from the company he once helped build. But for fans, the memory lingers. The image of a champion who lost himself to brain damage, drugs, and despair, and in the process, ended the lives of the people who loved him most.
Thanks for watching Dark Chronicles. If you want to go deeper into the world of true crime, watch this next story. And don't forget to please like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us bring more cases to light.